all this. But at the same time, I know like people watching kind of want to know the meat of the issue, the big thing we're going to be talking about, like, how can we prove God exists? So I'm going to try to not monologue, and I'm going to kind of touch on a few things I've got planned. People, if they want to know kind of references, whatever, they can check out the document in the description. But I want to zoom through the really, really basic ideas super fast. Like, why are we even talking about this? Like, who cares if God exists or not, kind of thing, right? Um, so let me whiz through that. So me and Alavari been chatting about important stuff to each other, and every single time, basically, the way I see it, believing in God is not theoretical, it's the heart of happiness. Everything starts and finishes there. If you don't have that, and people are seeing that in the world, it's not theoretical, it's not just like a belief, believing in the theory or something. It's incredibly important. Psychologists have known this for a long time, how important this is. So that's why it's important, and it's also important at different levels. Like why, like people put off by even thinking or believing in God because of all the rules, but the rules are God just being nice to you. It's like God says in the Quran, and Alavari is an interesting person that he actually runs a Quran class, even though he's an atheist. The Quran class that I love being part of, and so there's a verse of the Quran that basically says like. God just gives you. God is saying, "I give you these rules, so the good, whatever is I say is good is because it's good for you, and whatever I say is bad is because it's bad for you." So that's kind of why are we talking about this? Because it affects our happiness. It's fundamental to happiness. Alavari might disagree. We could talk about that in a bit. I should have even. Well, a quick look. I'm gonna quickly look at my list of. Okay, so this matters because of that, and it matters because of like you know relationships as well. So I put a Pew Research thing where it basically says the fastest growing religion, and you might say, what's that got to do with relationships? But you can imply lots of things by it, like it means you have children, more likely to have children. It's quite well known that if you're a Muslim, you're more likely to have more children and have a longer lasting relationships and stuff like that. Interestingly, being an atheist, considered unaffiliated on the list is way lower, but even worse, like the worst, is being a Buddhist, and I call it Western Buddhist because Westernized Buddhism has taken over from real Buddhism. Basically, nobody, I think, really follows real Buddhism, which is belief in one God. If you look at the history of it, that's another topic. Then I'm trying to cover this really quickly. I'm not really going to go through all my notes, but basically, um, I'm gonna talk about the scientific way about how do we know God exists, but there's something more important than that, a more important way that I'm not going to talk about, which is God Himself says, "I'm alive. Ask me. I'll prove that I exist." It's a promise that God makes in the Quran that says, "If you listen to me, I'll listen to you." God is not your slave; you're God's slave, whether you like it or not. Um, so that, and then there's also the Quran, which is a sign to humanity. It says things like you know it's got the Big Bang written in there. And it's like people go, oh, you might just be interpreting it a certain way. Well, why don't you read the verse of the Quran that talks about the Big Bang, and then you can decide if it's a certain interpretation or not. So think all sorts of things like that. But I'm gonna finally put something to Alavari, and you can Alavari. I said a lot of things. You know you can respond to whatever else you want to respond as well. But a verse of the Quran that says, coming to the scientific proof, do you not the disbelievers see that the heavens and the earth were no, whoops, wrong one. Which one am I looking for? Oh, men, a similitude or similitude, which is a sign or a sign of some sort, is set forth, so listen to it. Surely those on whom you call instead of Allah cannot even create a fly, though they would combine together for the purpose. So basically, even if all the scientists in the world would come together, they couldn't even create a fly. That puts things into perspective. And we're trying to, atheists would like to believe, us to believe, or themselves to even to believe, convince themselves to believe that random processes without an intelligent designer, creator, would somehow create not just a fly, but the whole world. That's just an impossible belief. And sorry, Adabari, I was supposed to say something even before that I kind of missed, and I think it'll be really good for our conversation. That the problem is not, it's not complicated proving God exists. In fact, it's just as easy as proving my computer or my phone has a creator, right? Just the same in the same way we have must have creator. We're far more complicated. The problem is, and I say this to Alavari because he's very open and brave to even have all these great conversations on public, is that we're not honest when we talk about, we're not honest when we debate it, right? There's a verse of the Quran, and that's not an insult to any particular one person. The Quran says, generally, people are open disputers. We dispute things that aren't worth disputing. Like, if I say my phone had a creator, you'd be like, yeah, I might not have, like, I mean, things we want to, we dispute things that are unnecessary. But how do we overcome that? I would like to suggest an idea that will be really interesting for this discussion, is that instead of, I think one of the habits is to misquote each other, right? So maybe a good practice would be, I might suggest a thing, and then you say something back to me, Alavari, and you say, you summarize what I've just said to you, my argument, and then you respond to it in a way, that way we don't misquote each other. And I'll try to do the same thing. Does that kind of make any sense? Like, I think it's really easy to straw man each other by misquoting each other, ignoring what we've actually just said to each other, and that will be a way to overcome our natural, I don't know, our natural way to not learn from each other. Do you know what I'm saying? Am I saying, I've said a lot of things in one go, but does that make any sense? That we often, our egos, we always talk about our egos, isn't it? And part of our egos is to outwit the other person. And one of the worst ways of doing that is to misquote the other person, not learn from what the other person just said, and try to find a way around it. And do you agree that's kind of a human weakness, first of all?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you'll remember from our Quran study discussions and in our WhatsApp groups and in our classes, the one thing I always do come back to is take it slow. 80% of philosophy is asking the right question and making sure you've understood the other person. And this actually comes, I've learned this from Buddhist monks debating kind of techniques and practices that they use in temples. You know, apart from meditation and isolation, they also really do deep dives into these things. So they've got a lot of time, and they spend a lot of time trying to understand. And when they understand each other and when they pose an argument, they would say, well, first, let me restate your argument back to you in a way that I've understood in my own. And do you agree with that? Even that process can take very long. And we've only got an hour or much less than an hour here. So we may not get on to every topic, but that's fine. I think that's the advantage of having free form discussions that can continue on to other sessions. That's the advantage of having asymmetrical discussions like in WhatsApp. I think, egos can interfere anywhere, whether it's written or whether it's in person, in various ways. Sometimes in-person discussions can get heated because you can see the other person, you can hear the emotion in their voice, and sometimes written is better. On the other hand, written can sometimes get misunderstood because you can't hear that. So there's no one perfect way of doing it. I think we have to have a variety of strategies. But yes, I think, and I've pointed these out before, when I feel that randomness is being used in a misunderstood way, entropy is being used in a misunderstood way, and even God. When I talk about God, I always try and clarify what I mean at the start of the discussion. So it shouldn't be, hopefully, too much of a mystery to you or to viewers what I mean by God. And I think we have to define our terms properly before starting any discussion.
Yeah, I agree. 1 hour will run out quickly. Let's see. So take anything I said. I said a lot of things, and then summarize a little bit of what I said to practice the skill, and then I'll try to do it in return when you say something. So summarize one thing you would like to have a go at.
So I would suggest, if the topic is, can we prove that God exists, or does God exist, or something like that, we have to define what God is. And my understanding of your belief is that God is some kind of supernatural being, i.e., natural meaning the physical laws that we observe and that we can investigate through empirical investigation and science. That pattern of being. Something is beyond that, as the Quran says, al-ghaib, so the unknown or the hidden realm, belief in the unknown. So something is there, which is a sentient being, i.e., it has some kind of a will, it has some kind of as in sentience and some kind of intelligence. But really, these are just metaphors. They're just ways. When we say God is loving, or when you say God is loving, or others say God is loving, it's a linguistic tool to try and capture some of what God isn't actually loving, because loving is a human aspect. God is much more than that. Loving is just sort of the nearest word we can use to capture what that is. The majority of, if not all of, what God is in essence incomprehensible and unattainable by human beings. But we have these things in the 99 names. We have again a posture of humility towards God. So that being, that sentient being, I don't see any belief for. I don't see any evidence that being and only that being exists. Now I see evidence where it could be that being. It could also be a natural evolution. It could also be, many other beings. It could be Zeus. It could be Krishna. It could be. So I see evidence of many of those, but I don't see exclusive evidence that it's only this. So that's another thing. So there could be many. We have to understand what we mean by God, and we have to understand what we mean by this God, as in the God. If we're only focusing on Islam, or only focusing on, I'm interested in many religions, Ahura Mazda, it was Zoroastrian faith. So we have to understand what we mean by God in general as a supernatural being, and also the individual God. But in terms of a reminder of what my understanding is, when I use the word God, I refer to Spinoza's God or Einstein's God. And what that means is just, again, just like we say, the God of the God of Abraham is loving. Loving doesn't really describe God. It's just an attempt to capture it in linguistic terms, so we can actually play with the concept. Similarly, the entirety of the cosmos, the natural laws, the beauty of it, the majesty of it, we're trying to capture that by saying God, something that's beyond a full human comprehension. We can get a glimpse of it. We can get a glimpse of the majesty, and we're humbled before it. That feeling is what Spinoza called God, and that feeling is what Einstein called God. And they were atheists, and so am I. And that's how I use God. So if we're saying, does God exist, we have to differentiate which of these gods we're talking about, because one of the gods I do believe exists, and the other one I don't see any evidence for.
Okay. I mean, to get to so let me do the thing I said we should be doing. So you're asking, what kind of God do I want to propose exists? And you know the answer: a conscious, intelligent God, not just laws of nature, which I think are basically Spinoza's God. I don't want to debate if Einstein believed in God or not. I'll just dispute that. Let's just say.
Well, he did
But
believe in God because, again, we have to. This is where we can't be as
well, I
stubborn
kind
or
of don't want to go into. I kind of want to, that's sort of secondary,
he
is what I'm
said
trying to say.
he used
To
the word God and said he believed in God. Now we can't, if we want to dispute. When he talked about wasting time disputing things that aren't, well, he had a definition of God internally, and he said he believed in it. It may not match up with your God, but you can't doubt that he believed in God unless you think he's some kind of liar.
sure,
Or
I won't mention Einstein then. Okay, so I
no,
want
no,
to
no,
focus
that's
on.
not what I'm asking. I'm not asking that. Listen to what I'm saying. I'm saying,
Oh,
do you believe that Einstein was a psychotic or schizophrenic or a liar? Because if you don't, then you have to accept that he believed in a God. It may not be your God, but he believed in a God on his own terms. We have to accept people at their
sure.
own terms. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Cool. Yeah, he believed in a God. We agree on that. Cool.
Yeah.
So, your question is, who is the God that I want to prove his
Yes.
existence? Let's say his. I'm not talking about male really. Just just wording. I don't say it to God. It's just insulting. That's why. So who is that God? I suppose. What is the special feature of that God that might be different to, let's say, Spinoza's God? Is that
Uh,
summarizing?
well, you've answered the question, that which I think is kind of, because if you ask me very naively, do you believe God exists? I would say yes, and I'd say I believe in Spinoza's God, but that's not a very interesting discussion. Let's put that aside. So now let's focus only on the sentient, conscious God of Abraham and of many religions. So there's various gods in there. So now what I'm asking is not the difference between that God and Spinoza's God, because we've already put aside Spinoza's God, right? I'm asking what if we're saying yes. So now we have to prove that a sentient God can exist. Number one, a sentient, all-powerful, supernatural God can exist. The number two, that it is the God of the Quran, or it is Allah, and not Ahura Mazda, and not whatever the Pastafarian God, etc. So that's
Okay, yeah, Pastafarian. Yeah. Okay. So I would say so. I'm trying to get in the habit of making sure I repeat. So your question is my God, the one I'm talking about, different to other people's beliefs in other
sorry. There's
conscious
two questions.
gods?
There's two questions. One is, let's take one at a time. Can a supernatural, all-powerful, interdimensional being exist? That's the first one. Can a? Yeah, that's the first. Then, if we prove that, then we can say, well, which God is it? But that comes
Okay.
after. The first question is, can a what evidence do we have that there is a conscious, all-powerful creator of the universe? It doesn't necessarily have to. You can approach that by trying to prove Allah, but it could just anyone.
Oh
That
yeah,
does.
that's even better. Yeah, that's better because I don't want to worry about names and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, so you're asking, is it possible even to prove a all powerful conscious being?
Yes. Creator of the
Great.
universe. Yeah.
Creator of the universe, that's as well. Yes, that's the key thing. Okay. So I would start with that we have any sort of machine. We don't have to see the creator. We got evidence of the creator. You see a phone, you don't have to know that it was made in a factory. You've never seen a phone factory before. Actually, I might have seen something, but anyway. But the point is,
That's quite important. That's quite important. Yeah.
that is
You may,
important. That's
someone
important.
can go and
There
check.
is,
Someone can go and
yeah,
check
you
it.
can check certain things. Yeah, yeah. But it's, there has been there's no example that I know of where something like a phone that has a function has been created by random processes. I could try to add on to that because I know you've been saying things like, because we have a WhatsApp group, and you said random is not as random as you might imagine. that kind of
before
thing.
we even come to that,
Oh
though,
yes, yep,
even
go
if
on.
we say, okay, but for example, I know many religious scientists, even cosmologists, even evolutionary biologists, who'd say that a pseudo random, I would say, or random process, even that doesn't disprove the existence of a God. They'll just say, well, God was the prime mover. If the DNA or if the cell or if the first organism came about by spontaneous processes where it wasn't like, someone designing a watch or God putting it together, assembling the pieces, it spontaneously happened. But the laws that allowed that to spontaneously happen were set in motion by God. So it's not as if there's only two options there, where either there's a God who created everything or there's random spontaneous processes. Actually, you can have both. You can have God as being the prime mover that then precipitated all of the spontaneous processes. So it's not that's a false dichotomy there. We have to be careful, because there are people, for example, Muslim or Hindu, very serious, cosmologists, scientists who study black holes and who study the primordial Earth environment, who do believe in a God. So we can't exclude those. So it's even before we even get to randomness, we kind of have to think, okay, if there were, just because we can show that, in fact, I'm kind of making your argument for you here, just because we can show that the DNA molecule can assemble spontaneously does not exclude the existence of a God.
Okay. I mean, my problem is that I don't think anything is spontaneous or random in the first place. I'm not sure how to. Yeah.
Let's dig into that, because that's where the philosophy is. Okay, well then, what do you mean by spontaneous? Well, this is one of the examples that I showed you, the Uri Miller experiment, where they try to recreate some of the conditions that were there in the early Earth atmosphere and in the early Earth, on the atmosphere and the environment that were there, and they've discovered that certain molecules that will be required for life were able to assemble without any obvious will, as in, like, the scientists weren't there saying, okay, go and bond with that, or they weren't trying to interfere in it. It just happened due to the intrinsic properties of whatever is in that test tube. So that's an example of it actually happening, and that's been repeated. And it's and also, even if not, one other theory is that it could be a meteorite that hit that already had some of the elements that were pre-made. Even if the Earth didn't have it originally, it was introduced into the Earth atmosphere, and that could have triggered some kind of, this is how life happens. Well, unless we've observed life to erupt. Now, again, none of these, again, I'm arguing against my own position here, none of these preclude the existence of a God, because we can just say, well, who sent that meteor, or who designed the laws of the universe in such a way that that first molecule could have assembled like this and then formed the first cell. All of this is still consistent with there being a God. That doesn't actually disprove that. So even if I was able to demonstrate that, it doesn't. You can just say, well, God made that happen, which is what the Mu'tazilites said. They said, well, if you, and we've used this example before, if you kick a football through a window and the glass breaks, the glass breaks because God is there moving the ball through the air every nanosecond, and when the glass breaks, God is within everything, or some part of God is in everything that's causing it to break. So not even a leaf stirs that unless God is aware of it, as per the Quran, and not just aware of it, it's within his consciousness somehow, within that being's totality. So God is in all things.
Sure. How can we get this? I mean, I want to, both of us having this conversation, I want to push the conversation in one particular way, but I want to get away from overly theoretical, overly philosophical, kind of almost distant from all reality kind of conversation. I want it to be I want to basically propose the more realistic.
You mean focus on like a day-to-day philosophy?
Okay, I'm not going to propose that even if things are random and they somehow random things could create all sorts of organized living beings, complex living beings that work essentially like a robot. I'm not going to say that doesn't disprove the God. I would say that's a good example. That would be fantastic if somebody could show that randomness could create living beings like us, or even a single germ, or even a fly, as the Quran puts it, right? That would
But
be
yeah,
very strong evidence. I'm saying that never happened.
but
Yeah,
is that because it's impossible? So yeah, you're right. That's never happened, but because we've not been able to start from, you know, the base elements or individual hydrogen atoms or whatever, and then end up with a fly or end up with a bacteria coming out of the test tube. Because that period, we almost need a fast forward button for life to make it happen, you know, because otherwise it would take a million years. So if we're saying that's the bar, then we're kind of missing a gap there, because maybe it is possible, but it takes a million years, which is the proposal. Again, if we understand
that's
evolution
great.
properly, evolution isn't saying, oh yeah, you know, just like God can make, you know, creation like that, man can also make like that, or randomness can also make like that. No, it's not saying that. It's saying we need a million years, we need a billion years for that to happen. So we have to judge evolution by its own merit. Again, understand what it's proposing. So we can't observe it, and evolution doesn't expect that we can observe a bacteria being assembled from the individual periodic elements all the way up to a bacteria in a week. You know, that can't happen, and evolution is not required to demonstrate that.
Brilliant, brilliant. That's actually something I kind of the main argument I wanted to give. The reason why it's such an important argument that you put forward is that I was an atheist for a while for one particular reason, and if I was trying to help somebody who was in my shoes, I don't know, 20 years ago, I'd love to help them by giving the following argument. So let me first of all summarize what you just said. You said that we can't really say that uh, it's not possible to, like the phone could have been made by random processes, but we just didn't give it enough time. And evolution has had a lot of time to create all these amazing machines, etc. Is that a fair
Yeah.
summary of sorts?
So I kind of
Cool.
said two things. One is, you're right. Evolution has, you know, the burden of proof on evolution is not to demonstrate that a bacteria can be assembled by randomness within a week. That's the wrong test to ask of it. And another thing is responding to your kind of everyday example of, I've got a phone, you know, I don't know the creator, I haven't seen the creator, but I can find it out. Like, I can look on the serial number if I wanted to. I can expend the effort and energy. Or someone's in China where they did make the phone, and I can call them up, and there are empirical ways where I can show that. So that's why that can't be used as I can't call up, you know, who can I call up to say who made this bacteria? I mean, I can't do that. We have to, you know, when we try to investigate the bacteria, we see that it has the hallmarks of having evolved from, you know, a process like the spontaneous evolution by natural selection. So those are the 2
Cool.
points.
So I'm going to focus us on the first one. So you agree that my summary, that is, of what you just said, that is, evolution had a lot of time to create what it's created, and that's why it's possible to create what it's
Yes.
created. Sure. I'm going to say very shortly that no, evolution did not have enough time to even create. If it depended on random mutations, did not have enough time to even create a single hemoglobin molecule, not even one, right? So if you look at the construction of a hemoglobin molecule, it's got 4 chains. I'm not going to go into details. This is something I'm particularly picking up because Richard Dawkins brought, uh, brought this up in his The Blind Watchmaker. And even if you had a million mutations every second since the beginning of the universe, and that's being really kind to evolution, because the what you needed to construct a hemoglobin was not there in the beginning of the universe. You just had, the really basic elements, helium and maybe hydrogen, whatever, if you're lucky, right? So you didn't even have those, but we're starting from the beginning of the universe. You would not have enough time to create a single hemoglobin molecule. And just for people to understand, and I'll explain why we know that, but just for people to understand what is hemoglobin, it's the red pigment that makes up blood, but obviously it's just not just red pigment, it's not just a colorant, but it's a very intelligent, efficient container for oxygen, right? So it's got a fantastic design. You need millions of them to make a single drop of blood. And I'm saying if you took all the possibilities for creating one of those based on, like, there's 20 options for each enzyme in, I think it's like 500, if you put them back to back, 500 long chains. So 4 chains, I think, make 500 long chain, right, if you were to make them, and you have to have them everything in order, right? Basic maths is you do 20 times 20 times 20. Basically, you'd get a number 10 to the power 700 roughly. That's such an impossible number that it's like just 10 to the power 50 is the number of atoms in the universe, just to give a scale, and then timed by that, 10 to the power 51 would be 10 times the number of atoms in the universe. So you keep times by 10. It's such an impossible number that, as I said, even if you had a million mutations per second, you would not have enough time to make one hemoglobin enzyme. You wouldn't have enough time. So people don't understand. I didn't understand 20 years ago when I was an atheist, the impossibility of even that being made. Never mind, as the Quran says, a fly being made by any sort of random processes, or even a bunch of scientists. Yeah. So that's what do you think about that?
Yeah, I kind of lost you part of the way there. Are you saying that, if I've understood you correctly, are you saying that because hemoglobin, just as a random example, and because you chose that because Dawkins chose it, but actually it could be any molecule, any complicated molecule, insulin or whatever, the constituent parts of it, it has like 1 million parts or whatever, it has 700 parts. What did you say? Is it the
I said it's got four, essentially the complex part of 4 strands of enzymes. If you stick them together, I think it comes to a length of 500 enzymes, as far as I remember. But yeah, and each enzyme, you got 20 options. So the maths you do is you do 20 times 20 times 20, basically 20 to the power 500, which comes to 10 to the power 700. So it's an incredibly massive, impossible number, or there's too many possibilities for it to have been made, even if you give it, since the beginning of the universe, to be constructed, it still wouldn't be made till now.
Yeah, I think we have to have a perspective shift here. Okay, let's look at what's called the famous Zeno's paradox. So I've got my 2 hands this length apart. If I half the distance, right, it would take me, and then if I half the distance again, over half again, how many times can I do that?
Infinite number of times.
Infinite number of times. Actually, so between my hands here, I have infinity, right?
Sure.
But if I keep dividing it half by half by half, will this hand ever reach that hand? No, but I just did it, right?
Sure.
So have I
because you didn't follow that rule, yeah.
Have I no, but I'm getting closer and closer and closer, right? You will get it. So there are things with our human, what I'm saying is our human perspective on things can often, even when it involves things like infinity, we can conceive of infinity within our universe, because things can get infinitely smaller, but at a certain time, at a certain scale, our cognoscitive tools, they are worthless. But that doesn't mean that infinity doesn't exist, because as I said there, you can have within any distance, you can divide it infinitely small. And we know that that does exist. It's just that at a certain point, we haven't got a hand or a scalpel. If you're dividing up some, I don't know, piece of food or something, or we don't have a ruler for me to measure infinity that much at all. But that doesn't mean that doesn't exist. So when you're saying that, so that's just like a thought experiment to say that.
So what am I saying? Sorry, what's my argument?
Yeah, so I'm using that as an example. That wasn't really related to anything directly you were saying. I'm using that as an example to say there are very strange things in our perspective, in our universe, where even where you think something might be infinite, but actually it's an everyday thing. We clap our hands together all the time, but actually, it's a paradox, right? Surely what I'm doing is I'm halving the distance every single time, but at some point the hands do meet, right? So using that in the back of our head, so allowing for the possibility that very weird things can happen, because you're kind of appealing to a common sense argument. You're saying, well, that can't possibly be the case because it doesn't have the time to do it. Well, technically, I wouldn't have the time to keep halving my hand because it would just keep going halving for infinity. It would never meet, but actually it does. So when you say that there's, are we talking about molecules? Are we talking about proteins, or what did you say when we say there's 20 options?
So hemoglobin is a molecule that has also the proteins in it. Yeah.
Okay, but when you say there's 20 there's 20 times 20 times 20 of what you mean of the hemoglobin? My understanding of it is hemoglobin is a protein. It's one protein, and within a protein you can have amino acids.
Maybe it's enzyme. I'm getting mixed up. Yeah. But anyway, you've got these strands, like let's call it Lego, and you have to put the right pieces.
Yeah. It's a Lego pieces. Yeah, which are called amino acids. And these amino acids, if you put them together in a chain, like beads on a chain, then that whole chain is called a protein. And depending on which amino acids you pick, the chain will have different colors and different functions because it will fold a different way. Like this bead may be sticky to that bead, and then so they will fold this way or that way. And just in those, I think whatever there are, how many amino acids there are, I think it's 20. Just within that alphabet of 20, just like with DNA, we have 4 A, T, C, G. With those 4, just a combination of those, but in a different combinations, will actually produce the variety of life that we have there just from those 4 letters. And even if you think computers, binary, it's only two states, but within those, the pattern that we can use those states in, it's either on or off. That can give graphical user interfaces and lovely colors and pixels and whatever, but it's only binary, right? So we're like a code with a set of 4, A, T, C, G, and that gives us pretty much everything. Proteins are whatever it is, 20 amino acids, and those can be
just to So could you summarize my point, and then I'll summarize kind of your response to me.
So I'm going to go into that. Sorry.
Sorry. Go on.
Yes. So you're saying the amino acids. Is that what you meant by 20? Is that what you meant by 22 different options?
I forgot the exact details, but
So in that chain, this is all me summarizing your argument or my understanding of it. In that chain for hemoglobin, that necklace chain, each bead can be one of possible 22. And what you're saying is 22 times 22 times 22, like that, it can go like this, right?
Yes.
So for it spontaneously, for hemoglobin, like, all we have is like hydrogen atoms.
I didn't say spontaneously, just.
Wait, I think you said by random association, right? That's what spontaneously means.
Oh, okay. Spontaneous means randomly, does it? Okay.
Well, we have to. As we said before, which is a kind of a related topic, there is no, as far as we know, there almost nothing that's truly random in our observable universe. There's things that are pseudo-random. There's things that might be random, but for our human, to the lay person, to the everyday person, we can call it random, but actually it's not random. Yes. So spontaneous it means that there's no conscious will saying, well, I'll take this bead and then I'll add this bead and then I'll add that bead because I know that I want to get to hemoglobin. There's no one.
Okay, cool. So now you define spontaneous. I agree with that. Yeah.
Well, that's again, I think that's it. So if that's your argument there, so that's why
I'm okay with your definition of
22
spontaneous
times
in that sense,
and that's what you're saying. Well, actually, it very quickly exceeds the chance probability of that particular chain of amino acids for hemoglobin assembling in that exact correct order in order for hemoglobin to have its properties, which is given by the order of amino acids. Because even if like the fourth one was the wrong type of the 22, then it wouldn't be hemoglobin, it'll be something else, and couldn't carry oxygen, it wouldn't be red, or it'd fail. So yeah, so that's the
I think you did that really well. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for
so
summarizing
that is not evolution. That evolution, the burden of proof on evolution is not to prove that happened spontaneously or randomly. That's not what it's saying. What evolution is saying is the first molecule, or the first like proto, DNA, RNA, or the first amino acid, and amino acids have been observed themselves to spontaneously form in the original experiment from the 1950s and others since then. So that's what evolution is claiming. That's what happened spontaneously. And then after that, there was a reproduction and selective pressure. So all of these things, so it's not random. It's not spontaneous. No more spontaneous than if I'm attracted to someone and we have a child. That child wasn't born spontaneously. Is because I was attracted to that certain person. Maybe there's something in our genes together. So that's a selection pressure that favored this. And maybe, if I have black hair and my wife has black hair, then our child may have black hair. So it's not as if we randomly, spontaneously were able to reproduce. That's what happened. So hemoglobin over millions and billions of years, it took, not random, not like, we threw a dice 22 million times and then it ended up with hemoglobin. No, we threw a dice once, 2 billion years ago, and then there was a selection pressure that meant that molecules that were useful reproduced and molecules that weren't useful died out or they disintegrated. So in doing that, that's not random. That's like saying, I'm going to roll a dice, but then if it's a 6, I'm going to just turn it over by 1 like that. If it's a 5, I'm going to turn it over by 1. So when God's hand or someone's hand is actually in the soup and he is interfering, then that's no longer random. That doesn't mean that it has a conscious will. It just means that there is a selection pressure. That's what evolution is trying to say. So hemoglobin serves a purpose and it's inside of an organism that reproduces. That's why hemoglobin survived. So maybe RNA survived in 4 billion years ago in the primordial soup, but there could have been like XNA, YNA, DNA, or not DNA, but FNA, whatever. There have been other versions that died out. Whereas the RNA that spontaneously came together and the amino acids that spontaneously came together, maybe there were 50 originally, but only 22 were useful. So that's where you get the filtering out, and that's why the favorable ones are kept. So evolution does not have to prove that that string of beads spontaneously assembled to make hemoglobin, because that's like asking, I want to see a bacteria be assembled tomorrow, and here I'll give you some periodic table of elements, make me a bacteria tomorrow from first principles, from the base resources. That's like saying that, and evolution is not saying that. Evolution is saying slow, gradual changes that are not random, that are favored over 1 billion years. That's the test of evolution.
Okay, so so there's definitely 2 things that I've kind of remembered from what you said, roughly, and maybe you can help me with it. So you're saying there's these special Lego things, maybe they're called as enzymes, right? Or maybe
amino acids.
Or even sorry, enzymes?
Amino acids.
Amino acids. Sorry, thank you very much. Yes. Okay, so these are these special Lego pieces, I call amino acids.
Yeah, let's just call them Lego. It's fine. Yeah.
Let's call them Lego. Yeah.
Lego of life.
Lego of life sounds good. I like alliteration. So these special pieces, once they were made, we could have a really efficient creation process. Sort of like, like a reproductive kind of style, some sort of environmental forces could easily help these Lego pieces form together in exactly the right order to make amazing things like hemoglobin, and then kind of somehow scales up on that. I think I'll stick with just beginning with that. Is that, have I understood that right?
Sorry, say that again.
So these Lego pieces, Lego of life, um, once they were built, it made creation a lot easier. Is that right?
We have observed that in the primordial Earth conditions, without humans or without apparently a creator interfering and kind of meddling in things, if you just leave it to just spontaneously associate by itself, we've observed that amino acids are formed.
Right, okay. So the claim is that there have been scientific experiments that we've talked about in the WhatsApp group that I've disputed, and given evidence to say that they didn't, they weren't formed like you claim, and current molecular biologists have said so as well. So I suppose there's a, since neither of us are molecular biologists, we have discussed it. I suppose we'll have to agree to disagree on that side of things, I guess.
It wasn't just one experiment. It's been shown repeated. I mean, if you research amino acids early Earth, you'll find in BBC, just popular science, as well as also peer-reviewed physics literature. Yeah, it's there. It's been observed, and not just amino acids, fatty acids, sugars, just all manner of complex molecules that together, if given a billion years, would lead to life, or are many of the constituents of life, living molecules. They have been observed to form spontaneously if you give that early Earth environment with the necessary, periodic, early elements.
Oh, okay. I thought you said, maybe I misunderstood. I thought you said there was an experiment, because now you said, maybe I didn't hear you say it before. You're saying, given billions of years, these amino acids can be formed. But I thought you said there was an experiment where people got some test tubes together, zapped them and whatever, and there and then they were formed in front of them. Which both.
Both
So it
have.
doesn't even take billions of years necessarily.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Well, the thing is, having it in a test tube, kind of concentrated away, there's less of a, if you have a whole Earth full of an ocean or something like that, for the molecules to find each other again randomly, it could be, it could be quite long. So yes, as far as we know, what we think happened is the Earth is whatever it is, 4 billion years old. The first 500 million years or billion years, we were waiting for these molecules to kind of find each other and spontaneously associate, but they did. That was the hypothesis. And then Miller-Urey, what they did was, and many others after them, it's, well, why don't we try and do a microcosm of that? It's not exact, because if it's an exact replication, we have to have an Earth-sized test tube and then put them in there and wait a billion years. So they did a microcosm of that, and it did, within I think, was it a couple of weeks or a month, something like that. They did observe some of those. Yeah, I think after a day. I don't know, after something like that, between days to weeks, that order of time scale, it was observed.
Okay, cool. So I'll put links to. I mean, you can put links as well. Maybe you can send them to me, what you're looking at and what we shared before, because we disagreed that is the case, that actually happened. That happened, let's say, in a way that resembled anything like what could possibly have happened on Earth. I'll have to look at it again, because we did look at it. I briefly read over it again. I read it like 10 years ago before as well, but I forget it because I don't think it's anywhere near realistic. just thinking where. So okay, cool. We've got to a certain point, you know. So I said, because I do kind of like the idea of us having a chat, you know, how you doing and that kind of thing. That's really important. And we've kind of only got 10 minutes left. So we've got, should we go to, so the point we've got to is that, and I'll say my summary, you say your summary, and then we'll just kind of chat away, right? I was saying even hemoglobin, so complicated, there's no chance it could have been made by random processes. And then you said, well, actually, you don't even need the whole of hemoglobin. You need this Lego of life called an amino acid. And if you get that, lots of cool stuff can happen. And it's been proved that amino acids can be made in a test tube if you put all the elements close enough so they don't have to be searched for, they don't have to search for each other or something. They will quite naturally come together to make these amazing Lego of life blocks that can make everything else. And I would say, first of all, that didn't happen. Second of all, they're pretty amazing Lego of life blocks that can create all the other stuff. That's my summary of what I think happened in the discussion. You give your summary. I won't dispute it. I think that's just like a nice way to kind of round it off. What's your summary of the conversation so far, up to this point?
From the beginning, well, yeah, we looked at, if the title is, you know, can we prove that God exists, or how to prove that God exists. First, we defined what we mean by God. There is a version of God that both of us are happy with: Spinoza's God, Einstein's God, which I believe in, or I use, you know, as a metaphorical tool. I use as just a part of my perspective on the world. Carl Sagan also used it. So that aside, but then we looked at sort of a conscious, sentient, all-powerful creator, supernatural creator of the universe. We started looking at that, and then we said, okay, well, one of the ways that you want to sort of in an everyday philosophy approach that is by implication. So this phone has a creator, and by implication, can't this very complicated hemoglobin molecule have a creator? And then the response to that was, well, it doesn't need to, because Miller-Urey, you know, unless you want to suggest that they're lying or they're psychotic or they're frauds or whatever, and it has been replicated. It wasn't just that one time in the 1950s where I checked it up, it was after a day. So they put in sort of the gaseous environment, the liquids that were thought to be present in the early Earth 4 billion years ago, and they just heated it up. And from that mixture, after a day, they got 5 amino acids. Of the 22, they got 5. So presumably, if you leave it another billion years, who knows? You know, maybe very quickly you can get most of them. And then some of the 22 are actually some of the other ones who just combined together to make a new one. So things like this, it has been demonstrated. I haven't seen any evidence that calls into question what Miller-Urey observed. And there's been nothing like, there's been, you know, almost 60 years of physics and chemistry done after that, which they've not like discovered any chemical laws or properties of these molecules that would have said, oh, hey, hang on, you know, if that's what we know about this molecule, how did Miller-Urey observe that? And, you know, there's been nothing that's sort of thrown into doubt or kind of being suspicious of their results, as far as I know. So I'm happy to look at I think what we shared in the WhatsApp group was I think it was a Ahmadiyya blog that had been written sort of trying to call into question some of the results or something like that, but I don't. It wasn't a scientific paper; it was just a blog, and I can't remember
There's
exactly.
a summary of scientific findings to disprove this idea that that experiment was represented.
Maybe they were disputing the relevance of Miller-Urey, but the fact that Miller-Urey started with this condition in the test tube and they ended with 5 amino acids, no one's disputing that, and that's all that's needed really for the evolutionary argument. So evolution doesn't have to prove that hemoglobin, you know, just sort of spontaneously or over 4 billion years arranged those amino acids in that chain spontaneously. That's not what evolution has to prove. Evolution does have to prove or demonstrate or rely on something like Miller-Urey, whereas initially there had to be some kind of spontaneous association of molecules to form, that initial abiogenesis or abiotic molecule that then kickstarted evolution by natural selection. That's what that proves. So yeah, you have to dig a bit deeper on that and see what objections there are. If someone is objecting to saying, no, Miller-Urey's environment did not reflect the early Earth, okay, yeah, that's worth looking at. It's been 60 years. Nothing has come to the fore that would have overthrown it, as far as I know.
Cool. Okay. Tell me something good today. What are you enjoying today? Or it doesn't have to be a big thing. I'm always about small things.
Today, this morning, I was at a church for a Sunday service with, again, refugee asylum seeker friends that I've been helping the past couple of weeks and months, as I mentioned in previous live streams, which is very heartening. Yeah, I got some takeaway food that I'm going to enjoy in a bit from there as well. Yeah, and martial arts class as usual in the morning. So it's been a good day, and sun is shining. We're getting some good weather here in London. So despite some challenges on the community service front, and it's not easy, but yeah, looking positive.
Excellent. I love that. You pack your day with lots of good stuff, quality relationship kind of stuff. I think that's really important. So I'm always pleased. Some people might think, I don't know, the nature of our discussions where, I don't know, people can think whatever they want, but I'm always very pleased by that kind of thing. That's kind of the whole point of what I try to do. My little things are maybe even really minuscule and not. But anyway, things like, I don't know, quite enjoying eating these. These are from my garden. These are Japanese plums, or
Wow.
I think they're called Japanese plums. They basically taste like mangoes and things like that. Just little things, kind of like,
delicious.
Yeah. It's kind of okay. So it's just little things like that. So I knocked on my new neighbor's door yesterday. So I'm living in a flat. I've got two places for my village home, which you can see, so my fake background, and I gave them a bunch, and I picked them up, from my garden yesterday, or my wife had collected them. She gave me a whole bunch because they're in season at the moment. They're basically growing all over. So just like little things, just enjoying kind of, little connections like that. So, I mean, I'll give you an example of why I love that kind of stuff. So I just knocked on the neighbor's door. They're new neighbors, two boys. And they're like, yeah, come in. And like one's in his bed and the other one, they're just like, they don't care about if they're ready or not, if their room is ready. Just really enjoy that part of Arab culture, which is kind of like, I think they have a phrase, there's no difference between me and you. There's nothing between me and you, which a lot of them live. I don't think they're perfect, but I think it's a beautiful thing. I think it's part of what I call the school of life, that you see different cultures and you go, like in London, you don't really have anything near that. You kind of have, I don't want to say people are miserable or horrible in London, but they do have a loneliness problem, which is linked to not connecting. And so when you go to another culture, you go, it is possible for humans to do that other thing and live a different way. So yeah, stuff like that. I think I feel lucky to do that, and I probably feel like it. So it's cool. I'm glad both of us are doing, cool and meaningful things. I'm really pleased with that. I mean, the reason why I asked Alavari those kind of questions is because I think men, we don't share important feelings enough, and it's not a girly thing to do. Men over here share feelings a lot. Men spend a lot of time with each other, sharing kind of each other's time without screens. So I love that. Yeah. Do you want to add anything? We got to. Oh, you know what? Well, let's have 1 minute, because I've already been so kind to squeeze in this time, but then I've got a lesson straight after this. So, Alavari, just say anything. Just share anything you like for 1 minute. Oh, sorry.
Well, Well, the quote that you referenced there is one of my favorites from Halaj. Between me and you, there is only me. Take away the me,
Oh,
so only you remain.
I love it.
Which is
Cool.
very goes to the heart of mysticism and spirituality, which I find is the most kind of hair-raising, awesome, majesty-inspiring aspect of this thing that we call religion, belief, and the human perspective on a universe that we can only barely comprehend. And in that, I think we're all united.
Thank you, AJ and Avari. Appreciate your time. Looking forward to next week already. All right. Bye. Have a good
Thanks,
week.
Alan.
Okay, bye.